Hey everyone, welcome back. When you grow old and are left alone, do these three things. Picture this, you're 75 years old. The house that once echoed with laughter and conversation now holds only the sound of your footsteps. Your children have their own lives. Your friends have moved away or passed on, and you find yourself facing something that terrifies most people more than death itself, being truly alone. But what if I told you that this scenario, which millions of people will face in the coming decades, doesn't have to be the tragedy we imagine it to be? What if growing old alone could actually become the most empowering, peaceful, and fulfilling chapter of your entire life? I'm going to share with you 3 powerful strategies that can transform solitude from your greatest fear into your greatest strength. These aren't just feel-good platitudes. They're based on decades of research, real stories from people who've walked this path, and psychological principles that can literally rewire how you experience aging. Stick with me for the next hour because by the end of this video, you'll have a completely different perspective on what it means to grow old alone. And if you're watching this and you're younger, trust me, this information could be the most valuable investment you make in your future self. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. This channel is dedicated to helping you live your best life at every age, and we're building a community of people who refuse to let age define their limitations. Now let's start with a story that changed everything. I thought I knew about aging alone. Her name was Margaret, and I met her when she was 82 years old. She lived in a small apartment in Seattle, and by all external measures, she should have been miserable. Her husband of 54 years had passed away 3 years earlier. Her 2 children lived across the country. Most of her lifelong friends had either moved to assisted living or died. But when I knocked on Margaret's door for what I thought would be a wellness check, I was completely unprepared for what I found. The woman who answered the door was radiant, not in a fake, putting on a brave face way, but genuinely deeply content. Her small apartment was filled with art supplies, books, plants thriving in every window, and the most beautiful hand-knitted scarves I'd ever seen. "Come in, dear," she said with a smile that reached her eyes. I was just finishing my morning meditation and about to start on my novel. Her novel, at 82, living alone. Over the next 2 hours, Margaret shared her story with me, and it completely shattered every assumption I had about what it means to age alone. She hadn't just survived the transition to solitude, she had thrived in it. She had discovered parts of herself that had been buried for decades under the roles of wife, mother, and caregiver. But here's the crucial part. Margaret's transformation didn't happen by accident. She had deliberately implemented 3 specific strategies that turned her solitude into sovereignty, her aloneness into wholeness. And those 3 strategies are exactly what we're going to explore today. Because Margaret's story isn't unique, it's replicable. The tools she used are available to anyone at any age, whether you're preparing for the possibility of aging alone or you're already living it. But first, let's address the elephant in the room. The statistics are sobering. By 2030, nearly 40% of people over 65 will be living alone. That's almost 25 million people in the United States alone. The fastest growing demographic isn't young families or working professionals, it's single seniors. This isn't necessarily by choice. Divorce rates among people over 50 have doubled in the last 30 years, what researchers call gray divorce. Adult children are more geographically dispersed than ever before. Life expectancy has increased, but so has the likelihood of outliving your spouse and peers. Now, I want to be clear about something. Feeling sad, scared, or anxious about the prospect of aging alone is completely normal and valid. These aren't emotions to be dismissed or overcome through willpower alone. The fear of isolation is hardwired into our DNA. Humans are social creatures, and the thought of being cut off from connection triggers our deepest survival instincts. But here's what the statistics don't tell you, and what most conversations about aging alone completely miss. There's a profound difference between being alone and being lonely. One is a circumstance. The other is a state of mind. Neuroscience research shows us something fascinating. The brains of people who are alone but not lonely show patterns similar to those engaged in deep, meditation, or creative flow states. They exhibit high levels of activity in regions associated with self-reflection, creativity, and what researchers call default mode network processing. Essentially, the brain's ability to make new connections and insights. Conversely, people who are surrounded by others but feel lonely show brain patterns associated with chronic stress, inflammation, and accelerated aging. This means that learning to be alone well isn't just about making the best of a difficult situation. It's about accessing a state of being that can enhance your cognitive function, creativity, and overall well-being in ways that might actually surpass what you experienced in your more socially connected years. Let me share another story that illustrates this perfectly. I want to tell you about Robert, a 78-year-old retired engineer from Portland. 2 years ago, Robert's wife of 52 years passed away suddenly. Within 6 months, he had to move out of the home they'd shared because he couldn't maintain it alone. His adult children, worried about his mental health, were calling daily, suggesting assisted living, social groups, anything to keep him from being alone. Robert tried everything they suggested: senior centers, volunteer work, even online dating. But nothing felt right. He felt like he was performing the role of a social person rather than actually being one. Then something shifted. Robert started to notice that his happiest moments weren't when he was forcing himself to be around others. They were in the quiet morning hours, when he sat with his coffee, watching the sunrise from his apartment window. They were in the evenings when he cooked simple meals while listening to jazz records. They were in the middle of the night, when he couldn't sleep and would sit at his kitchen table, writing letters to his deceased wife. Instead of fighting these moments of solitude, Robert began to lean into them, and that's when he discovered something remarkable. He had never really been alone with himself before, not truly. For over 7 decades, he had been a son, a student, a husband, a father, a professional, a caregiver, but he had never been just Robert. What happened next changed not just Robert's life, but his entire family's understanding of what successful aging could look like. Robert began implementing the same 3 strategies that Margaret had discovered, and within a year his children stopped worrying about him. Not because he had found ways to avoid being alone, but because he had found ways to be gloriously, peacefully, creatively alone. His daughter told me, "Dad is more himself now than I've ever seen him. It's like he finally gave himself permission to exist." That phrase, permission to exist, is at the heart of what we're talking about today. Because the 3 strategies I'm about to share aren't really about managing solitude. They're about finally fully inhabiting your own life. So let's dive into the first strategy, which might surprise you. Strategy: cultivate radical self-intimacy. Strategy number 1, cultivate radical self-intimacy. Now, before your mind goes somewhere it shouldn't, let me explain what I mean by this term. Radical self-intimacy is the practice of developing the same level of curiosity, compassion, and deep knowing about yourself that you might have once reserved for your closest relationships. Think about it. When you were married or in close relationships, you probably knew your partner's moods, preferences, rhythms, and needs intimately. You could predict how they'd react to certain situations, what would make them laugh, what would upset them, what they needed when they were struggling. But how well do you know yourself with that same level of detail and care? Most people, even after decades of life, are strangers to themselves. We've been so busy being who others needed us to be that we never took the time to discover who we actually are when all those external roles are stripped away. This is why many people panic at the thought of being alone. They're not afraid of solitude. They're afraid of meeting themselves for the first time. Radical self-intimacy begins with what I call deep listening. The practice of paying attention to your internal world with the same care you'd give to a beloved friend. This involves morning check-ins. Every morning, before you do anything else, sit quietly and ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? What does my body need today? What's my emotional weather like? This isn't therapy speak or new age nonsense. This is practical intelligence gathering about the person. You'll be spending all day with yourself. Let me tell you about Eleanor, an 81-year-old woman from Vermont. After her husband died, Eleanor started having what she called conversations with Eleanor. She would literally speak out loud to herself, asking questions like, "Eleanor, what would make you happy today?" Or, "Eleanor, what are you really upset about right now?" Her neighbors thought she was developing dementia, but Eleanor was actually developing something much more valuable, a genuine relationship with herself. She discovered that she had always hated cooking elaborate meals, but had done it for 50 years, because that's what wives were supposed to do. She learned that she was naturally a night owl, but had forced herself to be a morning person to match her husband's schedule. She realized that she was actually an introvert, who had spent decades performing extroversion. For the first time in her adult life, Eleanor began living according to her actual preferences, rather than her assumed obligations. She started eating simple, nourishing meals that she actually enjoyed. She began staying up late, reading mystery novels and sleeping in until 9 a.m. She stopped forcing herself to attend social events that drained her energy. The result? At 81, Eleanor described herself as feeling more alive and authentic than she had since childhood. This is what radical self-intimacy looks like in practice. It's not narcissistic self-absorption. It's the foundation of genuine self-care and authentic living. But here's the key insight. You can only be comfortable being alone with someone you actually like and find interesting. If you're a stranger to yourself, solitude will feel like exile. If you're a friend to yourself, solitude becomes sanctuary. Let me give you 3 specific exercises to begin developing radical self-intimacy, starting today. Exercise 1, the daily debrief. Every evening, spend 10 minutes asking yourself these questions. What brought me joy today, even in small ways? What drained my energy? What did I learn about myself today? What do I need more of tomorrow? Write down the answers, not for anyone else to read, but as a way of honoring your own experience. Exercise 2, the preference audit. Make a list of all your daily habits and routines. Next to each one, write whether it's something you do because you genuinely prefer it or because you think you should do it. Be brutally honest, then gradually begin shifting toward choices that reflect your actual preferences rather than your inherited shoulds. Exercise 3, the inner dialogue upgrade. Pay attention to how you talk to yourself in your head. Most of us have an internal voice that's far more critical and harsh than we'd ever be to a friend. Practice speaking to yourself with the same kindness and curiosity you'd offer someone you care about. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, this sounds selfish. I was raised to put others first, and I understand that concern. But here's what I've learned from watching hundreds of people navigate aging. The people who age most gracefully and contentedly are those who have developed a genuine, loving relationship with themselves. You can't give what you don't have. If you don't know how to be kind to yourself, you can't truly be kind to others. If you don't know how to enjoy your own company, you'll be dependent on others for your happiness. And that's not fair to anyone. Radical self-intimacy isn't selfish. It's the foundation of becoming someone worth being alone with. But knowing yourself deeply is only the first step. The second strategy builds on this foundation and takes it in a direction that might surprise you. Strategy 2. Create your legacy project. Strategy number 2. Create your legacy project. Now, when most people hear the word legacy, they think about what they'll leave behind after they die. But I want you to think about legacy differently. I want you to think about it as something you create and enjoy while you're very much alive. A legacy project is a meaningful endeavor that connects your life experience, skills, and wisdom to something larger than yourself. It's not about fame or recognition. It's about purpose, contribution, and the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing your life has added something valuable to the world. Let me tell you about Henry, a 79-year-old former accountant from Ohio. After his wife passed and his children moved away, Henry fell into a deep depression. He felt like his life was essentially over, that all his useful years were behind him. Then he remembered something. As a young man before he became an accountant, Henry had been passionate about woodworking. His father had taught him the craft, but career and family responsibilities had pushed it aside for decades. At 79, Henry decided to return to woodworking, but instead of just making it a hobby, he turned it into his legacy project. He began creating beautiful, handcrafted toys and giving them to children in local shelters and hospitals. But here's what made it truly transformative. Henry didn't just make toys in isolation. He started documenting the process, sharing the stories behind each piece, and teaching young people the traditional techniques his father had taught him. What began as a way to fill empty hours became a bridge between generations, a preservation of craft knowledge, and a source of joy for countless children. Henry's small apartment workshop became a place of pilgrimage for young woodworkers, wanting to learn traditional techniques. At 82, Henry told me, I thought my productive years were over. Instead, I discovered that everything I learned in my first 75 years was just preparation for what I'm doing now. This is the power of a legacy project. It transforms your accumulated experience from a weight you carry into a gift you give. It changes your narrative from, my useful years are behind me, to, my most meaningful work is just beginning. Legacy projects come in countless forms. The documenter, recording family history, community stories, or professional knowledge that might otherwise be lost. The teacher, sharing skills, wisdom, or experience with younger generations through formal or informal mentoring. The creator, using accumulated life experience to create art, music, writing, or crafts that express your unique perspective. The connector, bringing people together around shared interests, causes, or needs in your community. The healer, using your experience with loss, challenge, or recovery to help others going through similar struggles. The key insight here is that your legacy project doesn't have to be grand or public. It just has to be meaningful to you and connected to something beyond your immediate needs. Let me share another story that illustrates this beautifully. Maria, an 85-year-old retired teacher from New Mexico, began what she called her letter project after her husband died. Every week, she would write a thoughtful, handwritten letter to someone who had made a difference in her life. Former students, colleagues, neighbors, even strangers who had shown her kindness. These weren't thank you notes or casual correspondence. They were deep, reflective letters sharing specific memories, expressing gratitude, and often including wisdom or encouragement based on her life experience. The responses she received transformed not just her own sense of purpose, but often the lives of the people who received her letters. Former students wrote back saying, her letter had come at exactly the moment they needed encouragement. Old colleagues shared how her words had reminded them of their own impact and value. Maria's legacy project required no special skills, no significant resources, no travel or physical demands. Just paper, pen, stamps, and a lifetime of accumulated wisdom and gratitude. By the time Maria was 87, she had written over 300 such letters. But more importantly, she had created a network of connection and meaning that filled her days with purpose and her heart with satisfaction. Here's what I want you to understand. Your legacy project doesn't have to wait until you're 80. It doesn't require being alone or retired. But for those who are aging alone, it becomes especially powerful because it transforms solitude from empty time into creative, purposeful time. So how do you identify your legacy project? Here are 4 questions to guide your thinking. Question 1. What knowledge, skills, or experience do you have that took years to develop and might be valuable to others? Question 2. What problems in your community or the world genuinely concern you and feel connected to your life experience? Question 3. What would you regret not sharing or creating if you ran out of time? Question 4. What would make you excited to get up in the morning? Even if no one was waiting for you, the intersection of these answers often points toward your legacy project. But here's something crucial: your legacy project doesn't have to be your final project. You might have several throughout your later years. The goal isn't to find the one perfect thing. It's to always have something meaningful that connects your inner world to the outer world. Here's how to begin. Week 1. Spend time answering those 4 questions I just shared. Don't rush this. Let the answers develop over several days. Week 2. Research what already exists in areas that interest you. You're not looking to reinvent the wheel, but to find where your unique contribution might fit. Week 3. Start small. Don't launch a full project. Do one small thing that moves in the direction of your legacy project idea. Week 4. Share your idea with one person whose opinion you trust, not for approval, but for refinement and encouragement. Remember, the goal of your legacy project isn't to prove your worth or achieve recognition. It's to create a sense of purpose and connection that makes your days meaningful, regardless of how many people are physically present in your life. When you have a legacy project, you're never really alone. You're always in relationship with the people your project serves, the traditions it preserves, or the future it helps create. But even with deep self-knowledge and meaningful purpose, there's still one more element that makes the difference between surviving aging alone and thriving in it. And this third strategy might be the most important of all. Strategy 3. Master the art of solitary joy. Strategy number 3. Master the art of solitary joy. This is perhaps the most radical concept we'll discuss today, because our culture has taught us that joy is fundamentally social, that the best experiences are shared experiences, that happiness comes from connection with others. And while shared joy is indeed wonderful, there's another kind of joy that most people never discover: the deep, sustaining pleasure that comes from being fully present with your own experience of beauty, wonder, and aliveness. Solitary joy isn't consolation, prize joy. It's not settling for less because you can't have the real thing. It's a distinct and often more intense form of happiness that becomes available when you're not performing for anyone else, not managing anyone else's emotions, not filtering your experience through another person's perspective. Let me tell you about Catherine, an 86-year-old woman from coastal Maine. Catherine had been married for 58 years when her husband passed. For the first year after his death, she felt like she was living in black and white. Food had no taste, sunsets were just changes in light, music was just noise. But slowly, something began to shift. Catherine started taking long walks on the beach near her home, not because anyone suggested it as therapy, but because she had nothing else to do. One morning, about 18 months after her husband's death, Catherine was walking along the shore when she stopped to watch sandpipers, running back and forth with the waves. For no reason she could explain, she began to laugh. Not sad laughter or bitter laughter, but pure delight at the ridiculous earnestness of these little birds, playing their eternal game with the ocean. In that moment, Catherine realized something profound. This joy she was experiencing, this spontaneous delight in the sandpipers, was completely her own. It wasn't enhanced by sharing it or diminished by being alone. It was pure, unfiltered joy,